The time is exactly 12 after 9 o'clock. Welcome back to the second hour of news and views on Salam Media. Now, according to British American Tobacco South Africa, about 70% of cigarette consumption in South Africa is now illicit. We're going to be chatting to Sinenhlanhla Mnguni, who is from the Fair Trade Independent Tobacco Association, to find out more. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Morning. Thank you for having me on your show.
Lovely to have you here. Now, some people might argue that during lockdown, the government obviously banned cigarette sales of cigarettes, alcohol, and other such consumables, but very especially cigarettes, and people had no option but to consume these illicit cigarettes, to go onto the black market and to get them wherever and however they possibly can. We also know one of the reasons for the banning of the sale of cigarettes during that time was because of supposed health reasons. Surveys have further gone on to tell us no matter what sort of bannings or restrictions you put in place regarding the consuming or the smoking of cigarettes, it's not going to change the status quo. People are going to continue smoking and they're going to try and get the cigarettes by any means possible. Having said that, how does this illicit cigarette trade in South Africa impact the country, both from a monetary point of view and both from a health position?
Uh, Thank you for that. Look, I think when one deals with the illicit trade, a bit of education needs to first take place before we answer a question like that, because a lot of people are under the great misconception that illicit cigarettes are cigarettes that are made in underground factories and are of inferior quality to those that you find in the shops, and that's not correct. In actual fact, an illicit cigarette is any cigarette when the requisite taxes have not been paid on that
Ah,
cigarette. So any factory is capable of producing an illicit cigarette. So, for instance, during the lockdown period, because the trade and the sale of cigarettes was banned, any cigarette purchased during that period was illicit. All right.
okay.
An illicit trade, of course, takes place in a number of forms. I mean, you get what you call round tripping, where, for instance, the cigarettes are taken out of the country and brought back in, but of course, no duty is paid. You have ghost exports, wherein the cigarettes are declared for export but never leave the country, and again, the duties aren't paid there. Then you have what you call
Can I just
under
stop you there? Can I just stop you there? You talk about
yeah.
round tripping. How does it serve the manufacturer or the seller of those cigarettes to take them out of the country and bring them back in again? Won't that add enormously to his or her costs?
No, I mean those schemes are not obviously done through the detection of the revenue service. And you must remember these are goods that are manufactured at volume, and of course have a high what's it called, premium attached to them in terms of cost that they are sold at. So I mean all those are factored in, and of course ultimately when the duty is somewhere at around 22 rand some cents, you still would save, even if it had to add 5 rand to your cost. I mean, if one has to weigh up paying 5 rand and 22 rand, it's a no-brainer for someone that's involved in that trade. So, like I said, there's a number of mechanisms that are employed in the illicit trade, and I think before we even deal with questions of illicit trade, the public just needs to understand what that means. So, for instance, I know that there's a lot of emphasis being placed on certain brands being illicit, but sometimes that's sadly not true. And of course, it's just pushing the narrative of certain manufacturers against their commercial competitors. So we just need to be wary about who's pushing certain messages. And of course, we are not, aloof to the fact that the illicit trade in cigarettes is rife. We've got a massive issue in as far as the smuggling of cigarettes through our neighboring countries' border posts. And that, of course, is disadvantageous to the fiscus in that we do not then see the taxes from those cigarettes that are sold in this country. And we know, of course, that those cigarettes currently occupy quite a large space in the marketplace, and as far as the tobacco industry is concerned. So, of course, we've always engaged with the South African Revenue Service to encourage them to increase capacity at our various border posts, and in particular the Beitbridge border post, where it seems that a lot of the smuggling is going on, and as far as illicit cigarettes coming through from Zimbabwe.
Thank you for that background information, because I too was of the opinion that when we referred to the illicit trade of cigarettes, that they were of an inferior quality. But you've just corrected that misnomer. Recently, a couple of days ago, an illicit cigarette operator, manufacturer, call him what you will, there was an expose on this particular company. I'm not going to name names because I don't have enough information to go down that route, but I'm sure you know who I'm referring to. They're based here in Johannesburg. And we're talking about billions of rands in unpaid taxes. What happens in a situation like that? Is that a red flag to other illicit cigarette manufacturers?
Of course, I think where the South African Revenue Service is doing its job, and as far as ensuring that compliance is adhered to, we have to commend them, and of course that sends a strong message to the industry at large, and as far as ensuring that they're compliant. Of course, that process, like you correctly stated, is still at the court stage, and we should avoid commenting on issues that we do not have the full facts on. But my understanding is that a preservation order was obtained against that particular manufacturer. And like you correctly said, it seems that this dispute relates to billions of rands. So I think we need to see how that unfolds. But it's certainly a loud message to all other cigarette manufacturers in the country to toe the line.
How do you think they're going to toe the line? Do they then go on and engage with SARS to say, yes, I have been operating without paying taxes in the past 5 years. You can penalize me, but show mercy. And from here on, I will pay taxes. Having said that, it's going to impact on the over the counter price of cigarettes going forward if you do have that type of scenario.
Yeah, look, it would be presumptuous to assume that they are in the wrong and that they should go forward. But I mean, I know in the past, SARS did have some sort of a program like that where certain manufacturers came forward and declared that they had been non-compliant and wished to enter some sort of a voluntary disclosure scenario with SARS. And that was done, I think that was in and around 2014 when Project Honey Badger was still around. But I mean, as things stand, I think that everyone just needs to ensure that they're compliant in the industry and as far as the manufacturers are concerned, and of course, all the other players along the tobacco industry value chain. That, of course, then will ensure that the fiscus generates the revenue that it ought to generate in as far as the tobacco industry. We know, of course, that the illicit trade in the sale of cigarettes is robbing the fiscus of much needed revenue. And it's quite commendable that the Revenue Service is ensuring that it does not leave any stone unturned to ensure that anyone who is a role player in the tobacco industry is compliant.
This manufacturer or company operator that we're alluding to here and now was or is a very big game player in this specific industry. Is this then, is the arrest, or perhaps they haven't been arrested, but they're being further investigated? Is that going to impact on the price of cigarettes over the counter? Are they going to stop manufacturing? Or are there more than enough players in the market to provide for the demand of these cigarettes? Because as I understand it, you can buy these illicit cigarettes at half the price of a brand cigarette, a brand named cigarette. So obviously the larger community is going to go for the cheaper product.
Again, I think a distinction needs to be made between what's considered illicit and what's considered a cheaper cigarette, because that's a great misconception that's made out there. And because a cigarette is cheaper doesn't necessarily mean that it's illicit, and the other way around. because a cigarette is much more expensive doesn't mean it is not illicit. There are
How do we
many mechanisms.
distinguish? So how
It's
do
very difficult. I mean, only the South
yeah.
African Revenue Service would be able to make that or confirm whether a cigarette is illicit or not. No, you can't do something like that by the naked eye. Like I said to you earlier on, I mean, a cigarette could be 50 rand, for instance, but the manufacturer hasn't paid that excise over to the receiver, and then that cigarette is illicit. So again, it's a great misconception that cheaper cigarettes or cigarettes, sometimes it's not even cheaper cigarettes, but cigarettes which the general public is not familiar with, there's an assumption that they are illicit, and that's not always correct. And majority of the time, it's not correct. So again, I think we need to go around educating the public, and this is something that I've raised with the South African Revenue Service about what constitutes an illicit cigarette and what does not. And again, going back to your question, I cannot speak, of course, for that particular manufacturer and how their pricing structure is going to be affected by whatever investigations are going on. And I think that each manufacturer employs its own marketing and commercial strategy. And I don't think that it is affected by the fact that another manufacturer is undergoing investigation. So I don't think that it really means much in as far as what the trade strategies of other manufacturers are going to be just because another manufacturer is being investigated.
We do know that tobacco consumption is bad for your health. And these, obviously the warning is printed on the back of packages, but that doesn't seem to make a difference to people who are hooked to cigarettes. Having said that, is there in any way in which we can educate the broader public, the broader smoking public, as to illicit cigarettes or otherwise, and how to make the right choice in buying cigarettes which are legit and where taxes are being paid over to the revenue services? Because that's the right thing to do, is it not?
Definitely, definitely. And I think to some extent, perhaps the industry role players and the South African Revenue Service could embark on some sort of a education campaign wherein we, advise of which cigarette manufacturers are legitimate and whether they are compliant in as far as the tax laws of this country, and ensuring that, of course, the greater population understands what an illicit cigarette is, and also the health risks associated with the smoking of cigarettes, which I think the Department of Health, by the way, is doing a phenomenal job at doing that. I mean, we've already seen that South Africa is a leader worldwide in as far as advancing the health interests of the population in and against the tobacco industry. So I think a lot is being done. We obviously see a new act that's going to come into place, wherein the introduction of plain packaging is going to come into effect, and the ban on counter display units, and also the regulation of the electronic cigarettes and other nicotine delivery systems will come into effect. So I think quite a lot is being done, and we have to commend government to some extent and not always criticize. Where there is merit, we need to, of course, commend them for what they're doing. And in addition, just in summation in relation to the illicit cigarettes and so forth, I think that a lot is happening in as far as industry is concerned to educate the masses in as far as what constitutes an illicit cigarette and what isn't. I mean, an easy way of verifying is to look at where the cigarette is manufactured and the cost of that particular cigarette. The biggest challenge is, of course, that we live in a country where the economy isn't in great shape, and people are always going to be looking for these cheaper cigarettes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just in closing, you spoke about the Department of Health doing great work in terms of going for plain packaging, doing away with cigarette adverts, etc. Do you think that's going to go a long way in discouraging people from smoking and bring
Look, I
cigarette
mean,
sales down?
I think the evidence shows that smoking in South Africa has decreased, and in particular, the smoking of the traditional cigarettes has decreased from perhaps the year 2000 to date. It's a shrinking market, and it's adapting and evolving as an industry in that people used to be brand conscious and now they become more price conscious. So definitely, and I mean, it's shown worldwide that measures and mechanisms such as plain packaging, the ban on the advertising of cigarette products, vending machines, and so forth have resulted in a reduction in the amount of smokers we have worldwide. So I think that the evidence is there for all to see.
Sinenhlanhla Mnguni, thank you indeed for your time this morning. I certainly have been educated as far as illicit cigarettes are concerned. I'm not a smoker, might I add, but I have been educated. Thank you indeed for your time, and your insights go well.
Thank you. Right there.
It is exactly 28 after 9 o'clock. News and views on Salam Media. Standing by to talk to us is Dr. Praveen Naidu, and we're looking at the issue around the underpayment of domestic employees and probably other such abuses against this very vulnerable sector in our community. Do stand by.